It's getting to be late autumn here in the garden. We're heading into winter. Temperatures have definitely taken a drop, even just from today. And although the polycrub is a far cry from it at its height this summer with its tall tomatoes and bushy aubergines and peppers galore, there are still some things in here. Not least some of my potted plants that I've moved from the patio in here to overwinter. There's some greens planted up as well. But in this far bed over here, I have yet to take the harvest of sweet potatoes. Last year was the first year that I grew sweet potatoes, and I am growing a variety called Murasaki. It's a Japanese sweet potato, and it's a better variety for growing in Britain where I live, especially if you grow them undercover when you're this far north, as I am here on the Isle of Man. And as you see back behind me, Josh and I put together this trellis for them to grow up this year. And while last year I did allow them to sprawl out of the bed and just go whatever way they wanted to, this year I wanted to keep them under a little bit more control. Now this worked pretty well, although they did not want to climb up the trellis on their own. I had to weave the vines in and out, and even now you can see a lot of the vines came up off the top and then kind of flopped over, and they're looking for other places to grow. They want to grow towards the light. But it did give me enough space to put in quite a few more plants underneath them, and I had some more aubergines and peppers here, and of course the Japanese indigo down on the far ends. Now that all of the foliage has died off, it's time to take the harvest, and I'm really excited to see what I have, because last year I had 2 plants, if you recall, and I got a decent sized harvest. This year there's quite a few more, and I'm hoping that that means a lot more sweet potatoes. Before I start digging all of this up, let's have a closer look. All of the foliage is pretty much dead, and then it goes all the way down to where the sweet potatoes are growing in the bed. And although they are a tangled mess, you can see where they come down, and there are loads of vines coming out from one point. And this is going to be where most of the sweet potatoes are going to be to harvest. If you grow sweet potatoes in parts of the United States, in Australia, or other places that have hot summers or even subtropical climates, you might be looking at my setup and thinking, what on earth is she up to here? Because in a way, this can minimize the potential of your harvest by growing the vines up vertically. But let me explain. In warmer climates, you can plant sweet potatoes outdoors, and they love it. They love the heat. They don't mind a little bit of a drought. And as their vines start scrambling over the ground, they touch down further and further from their original planting area, and they start growing more roots and more tubers. And a single plant can give you a massive harvest. That's not the case here. We don't get those hot summers. And so sweet potatoes outdoors, they tend to grow lots of leaves and not do as much in the way of growing roots. Even indoors or undercover, such as in the polycrub or in a greenhouse or another type of polytunnel, they still need a little bit of babying here to do well. And even then, they tend not to grow very many tubers other than in the area where they were originally planted. So those vines that are spreading on the ground in warmer climates and growing more tubers as they're growing more roots along the stem doesn't happen as much here. I might find a few sweet potatoes around in this area away from the plant, but not many. And so that's why it makes sense to grow them vertically, because getting those vines off of the ground gives me more area to plant other crops, but it still feeds this base area of where I originally planted the sweet potato. And so that is why I have this setup. And that's why this kind of a setup is really good for people in Britain, in parts of the northern US and Canada, any place where it's better to grow sweet potatoes under cover. Sweet potatoes are generally grown from what are called slips, which are the start of vines or sprouts that start forming off of one of those sweet potato tubers. So when we plant sweet potatoes in spring, we don't plant an actual tuber because that's a waste. What we tend to do is set that tuber in water or compost and wait for those little sprouts to start forming. And then when they're a decent enough size, you can either pinch them off or you can cut them off with a little bit of the tuber still attached, and then you can root them in their own pots of compost. And then those plants will carry on growing and become their own individual plants. So in this way, one tuber can mean 5, 6, or even more plants, which makes a lot more sense than putting one whole tuber in the ground for only one plant. So we tend to save our best tubers from each harvest so that we can start them off for slips again the following spring. I'm going to begin by harvesting this very first one here and see what we get. I have to be very careful with this fork here because I speared some last year, some sweet potatoes. So I'm just going to kind of gingerly work it down. I'm not going to push it too much. I've not watered this bed in a bit, so the compost is really dry. Let's see what we get. I just saw something come up here. Oh my goodness, this never gets old. Do you see this? Wow, the first sweet potato. Now, if this is what is coming with all of these plants, my goodness, this will be an amazing harvest. Let's see if we can find some more down here in the ground. Oh, wow. Wow, 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 wow. You put all that effort into growing a crop that you can't actually see growing because it's under the ground. And this is kind of like the moment of truth, seeing what actually grew. Well, here we have this year's sweet potato harvest, and I've laid them out in a row. There were 6 plants, and I've put them in order of how I dug them up. So this lot here on the side here, these were from plants that were growing here and here. And as we go further along, these were from plants a little bit further down the bed. And one thing you'll notice is that the harvest and the size of the sweet potatoes gets smaller as we get down the row. So compared to these ones up here, nice big chunky ones, these ones down here are a little bit smaller, a little bit sadder. The reason for that is that they were competing for nutrients and water with all of these indigo plants. The last two in particular, the last 2 plants that were growing here and just over here. And so I've taken away from that I need to give my plants a lot more space. The automatic Oyas were fantastic though, and I found quite a few sweet potatoes right around where they were put in the soil. And these are essentially little reservoirs of water that the plants can draw from, and the sweet potatoes seem to really thrive because of that. And I will be taking them out and then digging over this bed a bit, putting more compost in the winter, and storing these until next year. Very good investment. Now back to these sweet potatoes. I think we should weigh them. Just like last year, I brought my digital kitchen scale out to weigh the harvest, and the grand total is 6.3 kilograms, which averages out to about a kilogram of sweet potato per plant. Now, obviously, those plants that were over here were producing more. I didn't weigh them out individually, each plant. I might do that next year. But overall, that's a really good yield for a crop that I've pushed to the back of the bed and just given essentially a vertical growing space here in the polycrub, and I was giving a lot more attention to the plants in the front. So those peppers that I used to make homemade paprika, there were some aubergine, so eggplant a little bit further down as well. I'm really, really pleased with that. And I'm also excited to know that vertical growing really does work in my climate for growing sweet potatoes. Now, what I need to do is cure sweet potatoes. And I think a lot of people aren't aware that you cannot, well, you can eat sweet potatoes that are freshly harvested, but they don't have that sweet, delicious flavor that we know from sweet potatoes. They need to be cured in a really warm and humid place. So I'm gonna take these inside the house, put them into a plastic bag and keep them in our lounge, which is the warmest room in the house because we have the wood fire in there. And I'll leave them in there for a few weeks. And then after that, I can put them into long-term storage. And I think probably this one is the best one of the lot. I might keep this one to start slips for next year's crop. This is only my second year in growing sweet potatoes, but I've found that if I tick the right boxes, if I choose the right variety, I give them the climate that they like to grow in, then it's not that difficult to grow these. So if you're in a similar climate, say in Britain, in parts of the Northwest United States, Canada, New Zealand, know that if you can create that warm and humid environment undercover or potentially with cloches or something over a bed, then you can grow sweet potatoes. Also, make sure that you're growing a variety that is known to do well in a temperate environment, like these Japanese sweet potatoes. And knowing how they grow in a temperate region, that the base of the plant is where the majority of the tubers will be, then you know that you can grow them vertically and you're not going to have to worry about providing more space for them. You can grow them up a wall in a greenhouse, put in some fence panels like we've done here, and they do beautifully. Now, this week I'm not taking you through the rest of the garden because it has been extremely busy with Christmas markets and all of that, but I will be back with you in the next video with a massive pile of wood chip that needs to be spread and more things to do in the garden. And lastly, I have a soap making course that I am currently offering on a Black Friday deal. It's a 16 video course, and today is the last day. Today and tomorrow are the last days that you have to take advantage of the 50% off that I'm offering for Black Friday. And the discount code for that is Black Friday, and there's a link down below in the video description if you want to go check that out. And I take you through how to use all natural ingredients, including homegrown flowers and herbs, to make your own handmade soap. It's a great interest, great hobby to take up over the winter. Right, I'll see you next time here for another video on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.